Before I exited my e-commerce brand Bottle Keeper for 8 figures, I took a product that I thought was overpriced at $20 and I turned it into a $40 product over the course of 2 short years. Now, that single decision had a bigger impact on our underlying profitability inside the business than pretty much anything else that we ever did. It wasn't our ads, it wasn't our conversion rates, our AOVs, it was not even Shark Tank, frankly. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how I think about pricing and why yours might be too low. In fact, it's probably too low, and how you can figure out the right number for price on your own, given your product and market, no matter what niche you're in. So let's get into it. Out of anything you can do inside of your business to impact profitability, particularly if you're operating in the e-commerce world, pricing is at the top of the list. Now, there are a number of other levers, things that we want to maximize, like average order values and conversion rates, lifetime values. All those things are mission critical important, but frankly, pricing plays a huge role in all of those things. When it comes down to it, there's not much that comes close to the impact that you can have on the business and its efficiency than pricing. And the reason for that is because pricing directly controls how much of every dollar you earn that actually stays inside of the business. Every time you make a sale, a chunk of that revenue immediately goes towards expenses that are tied to the order. These are called variable or sales related expenses. These are things like cost of goods, shipping and fulfillment, credit card fees, Shopify fees, and your ad spend. The percent of every dollar that gets eaten by those costs, this is called your variable margin. So if you make $1 and you have 75 of those cents goes to those costs, you have a 75% variable margin. What's left after that, that remaining 25 cents, is called your contribution margin. This is the amount of money that is actually contributing to the business to pay for your fixed expenses, things like your payroll, your rent, your software, your health insurance, all those other things that are not tied to sales. What's left after that is your net profit. So when we do things to impact our prices, when we raise our prices, those costs per order, they stay pretty much the same. They don't change as our pricing changes, but the revenue on that individual order goes up, which means a bigger percentage of each dollar makes it through to that contribution margin to pay for the fixed expenses and give you more net profit. Even a small increase completely changes the math. Let's take a business with $200,000 in fixed expenses and a 90% variable margin. That means that 90 cents of every dollar is going towards sales related costs, including advertising. So only 10 cents is contributing to that business. At that rate, if you want to make $50,000 in net profit, you need $2.5 million in revenue to get there. But if you increase prices by just 10%, the variable margin drops to 82%. Now that's 18 cents of every dollar that reaches your contribution margin instead of 10. That's an 80% increase. Massive in every dollar that is earned for each sale that you're making, and it goes directly into the business. So that same $50,000 in net profit can now be generated on $1.38 million in revenue instead of 2.5. So the business could nearly cut its revenue in half and still make the same profit. And if revenue stays at 2.5 million with those margins, the margin improvement that we get from contribution profit, the net profit jumps to $250,000. That's 5 times the profit on the same amount of revenue. And all of that came from a 10% price increase. Now, you can try to renegotiate your cost of goods with your manufacturer, and you should, but you're at most, unless you get into real significant scale, we're talking maybe you save 0.5%, 1%, 2% at best. Now, we should do that. That's good. But what has the ability to fundamentally change the business and all the underlying math to drive more profit is dealing with prices. And by the way, if you want to see exactly how a price change would affect your specific margins, your break even, your required advertising performance, check out Pentame by clicking the first link in the description. It takes in all of your financial data, it takes in the marketing and revenue data, and it just shows you what happens live in real time when you adjust your pricing up or you adjust it down. Now, let's get back to the video. So the next question becomes, how do you actually raise prices without losing all of your customers? And the first thing I'll tell you is that this fear about raising prices is almost always bigger than the actual consequence. It's an emotional response to something, and I totally get it. We are humans, we respond to things emotionally. But I can tell you firsthand that the conversion rate doesn't always drop when you increase your prices. Sometimes it actually stays the same, and you just made the entire business dramatically more efficient without sacrificing sales. But you don't want to just guess at it, because this is a data question, not an emotional one. The way to approach it is incrementally. Don't raise your prices by 300% overnight and just hope that it works. Let's test the pricing up in 5, 10, 15, even 20% increments, depending on the price of your product. Watch the data and then test a little bit more. Watch it again and test a little bit more. And what we're looking for is the balance between that higher margin per order, the higher contribution margin per order, and how the conversion rate changes. Because even if conversion rate drops a little, the marginal improvement to the business can more than offset that conversion rate change, and you are still ahead ahead. You're now operating a more efficient business. And the other important piece of the puzzle here is adding perceived value so the price feels earned. For my company, Bottle Keeper, we didn't just jack the price up 2x overnight. We made a number of small additions to the product over the course of 2 years that were driven by our customers and the feedback they were providing. They were telling us they wanted a tether to attach the cap to the bottle. They were telling us they wanted a bottle opener. They wanted powder coating. So we did those things and it was not expensive. But adding these things to the product that cost cents, all of it probably cost less than $1 in hindsight. It added so much value to the product from the customer perspective that it allowed us to test that product up from a $20 price point to a $40 price point over the course of a couple of years. Now, the key to all of this is to think about what you can add to your product that adds real value to the customer. And it doesn't have to cost a lot. It just needs to make the customer feel like they're getting more value, something better than they got before, or better than your competitor, or better than the next thing they see on the shelf. But either way, you still have to test it. You watch what happens, you let the numbers tell you where that ceiling is. And it's all about the relationship between that pricing and the impact it has on the conversion rate. The answer to what your price should be is never a gut feeling. It's a test that we need to run. You need to measure it and adjust based on the data that comes back. How to use your numbers to find the right price. Now, it's one thing to say you should just raise your prices, and it's another to know how far you can push on them. And that all starts with understanding where your variable margin is without advertising expenses. Now, this is the percent of every dollar that goes towards non-advertising variable costs like cost of goods sold, shipping, fulfillment, credit card fees, Shopify platform fees, Amazon fees, etc. This number is important because it tells you how much room you have left over after those expenses to pay to acquire a customer. This is how we set the ad budgets. So if your variable margin without ads is under 40%, you're generally in a good spot. We want it to be as low as possible. But if you're between 40 to 60%, we're pretty good. And if you're above 60%, that's a problem. This is red flag territory. The reason for that is because you need to get a 2.5, a 2.5 return on ad spend just to get to break even before we've even talked about covering fixed expenses and trying to generate net profit. At Bottle Keeper, our gross margins were high. They were roughly 85%. And a huge part of why they were that strong was the pricing decisions that we made over the course of the first few years in that business. And here's where pricing connects directly to your advertising performance. When you increase your price, your needed return on ad spend to get to break even comes down. Here's a tangible example of a company inside of Pentane. In this business, they've set their net profit target at 10%. So they want to generate, of every dollar they earn, they want 10 cents of that to go to net profit. At $10,000 in ad budget, they have to be at a 13.95 return on ad spend to accomplish that. But if we take that up to their last 30 days of ad budget, about $88,000, they're at a 4.27 return on ad spend at that ad budget. Now watch what happens as we start to increase prices. We reset the lower limit on where that ROAS needs to be. With a 10% price increase, that drops to 3.69 return on ad spend. At a 20% price increase, that drops to a 3.31. At a 30% price increase, it drops to 3.05. Now, it's important to note, these are the guardrails. These are as long as it stays above this number, you are in the green. It is working, it is net positive for the business. If it falls below the number, it is not performing, and we need to think about pulling that pricing back. Now, on the other hand, let's talk about discounting, which does the exact opposite than adding a price increase. Your variable costs, those sales-related costs, setting aside advertising, they don't change. They are the same amount of money whether your price is at $1 or it's at $1.50. It's the same amount of cost if it's at 75 cents. So when we look at that in action, you can see the same company is at a 4.27 return on ad spend at their current ad budget to hit their 10% net profit margin goal. If we start doing discounts, let's add a 10% discount to that. Their now needed return on ad spend to achieve their goals 5.3. At a 20% discount, it jumps to 7.57. These are massive changes. Now, we expect when we do discounts that conversion rates and ROAS are going to increase, and maybe they do, but we need to understand these guardrails so that we don't discount into a hole and not realize it was a disaster until we get our P&L sometime next month. So in this circumstance, it's important to note that we weren't changing the ads. The underlying business and the math in the underlying business, it made the need for the advertising and the performance more efficient. And that means the marketing team, it's easier for them to win. It's easier for them to hit their targets because we start working with goals that are more achievable. Now, to make all of this super concrete, finding the right price for your product comes down to 3 things. First, you need to know your variable margin without ads so we can understand how currently healthy and efficient the business is and how much we can afford to spend on advertising. Second, bump your prices up incrementally and watch how conversion rates respond. Third, use your return on ad spend and contribution margin data to tell you whether the price is making the business better or if it's making the business worse. Is it more efficient or is it less efficient? If contribution margin is going up and your ROAS target is getting easier to hit, you haven't found the ceiling yet. If the conversion rate drops enough that it offsets the margin improvement, the data will tell you that, and you know that you need to stop and potentially pull back. It's all about testing and letting the numbers tell you exactly what you need to do. Now, if you want something that does all of this for you, does all of the math automatically, that's exactly why we built Pentane. You can try it out by clicking the first link in the description. It connects all of your financial data, your accounting system, your marketing and revenue data from all those platforms, and it lets you model the price changes before you commit to making them. It's like a big magic what if 8-ball machine. So you can see exactly how those changes impact the business before you go and make them, and then you can track whether it's actually working over time. Again, this will be linked in the top of the description. And if you want to hear the story of how I turned down Shark Tank and still generated over 60 million in revenue, then check out this video next.